Hey guys, welcome to another Evoke tutorial. One second. This is the second time I've recorded this, so I'm a little burnout on the whole thing, but I'm definitely not gonna let that stop me from making a good video. So here is a drum loop that I have. I just made it for the purposes of demonstrating arrangement. Here's the first little bit of it. Nothing super fancy, just a bunch of percussion and snares and hats and stuff. And as I talked about before, I'm going to be using the bass sample from last video. Actually, one thing I wanted to talk about is the first tutorial. The main question that I got was, why are you decolorizing this? Why are you making this flat? What's the advantage of doing that? And the answer to that is very simple and very complicated. The simplest explanation I can give is if we look at the sample, just the sample, in span, which I have right here, it's more or less flat. Obviously, I mentioned before, I left a lot of the bass in because I wanted to keep that sort of low-end heavy. If you imagine that right up here there's a line, or at the ceiling of span there's a line, eventually we're going to be pushing all this spectral content into that line. So if you imagine that line is like -9 dB, and you know, because you do a lot of gain staging, which I'll probably talk about in the next video, that you want your bass to hit at -9 dB. -9 dB is a specific volume, and regardless of the spectral content, you'll adjust the gain and increase it until it gets to that volume. But if that volume is the ceiling of span, then when we boost this up, that low end is going to hit it first. So at 9 dB, this entire sound is going to be very low end heavy. And if we're making a bass, that's great. If we wanted that, if it's flat, that means that all this stuff down here is going to be louder by comparison. So rather than this hitting the ceiling and then there being 7 decibels of space between the highest peak and the lowest low, then there's going to be a much smaller range of decibels. So this area is going to be just as loud as this area. So when we're decolorizing, what we're doing is basically spectral compression. And what I mean by that is that you're taking the individual peaks and you're moving them so that they're more equal to the volume of the valleys, and in doing so your whole sound is louder overall. It also means that when you load it into sampler, as I intend to do, right meow, then typically what you would have is you play a sound, and when you move the pitch up, so let's do it dramatically so I can show you. Look at this peak right here. Now it's up here. And if those peaks are less dramatic, that change in coloration is less dramatic. So that when I use an EQ, I can cut out specific ranges of frequencies without having to ever worry if where I'm playing the sample is affecting how that specific range of frequencies is coming across. Whereas right now, let's say I decide I don't want as much mid-range. Well, when I play the sample higher, it doesn't really matter because the whole thing is mostly flat. Whereas if I had something with a really big peak, when it crossed over this point where it's accentuated, it would be louder by comparison. So hopefully that's a good explanation. Without talking about it too much more, I'm going to dive into sampler. First things first, I know I made this bass in E, so I'm going to tune it appropriately. There we go, that's what I remember it sounding like. Just so I can get it sounding good, I'm going to boost the volume and do some broad level adjustment with a frequency splitter. And what's cool, again, now that it's flat, if I boost the highs are going to be boosted regardless of which note I play by the same amount. And I'm going to preemptively duck the mids because what I'm going to do is probably going to boost them. Another important thing to trigger is snap. And what that means is that my loop points are automatically going to snap to a 0 crossing. What I just did there, by the way, is I enabled looping, and then I linked it so that the start of play is the same as the start of loop, because I like to do that. So if you hear, I can turn snap off, and there's going to be a little popping right at the loop point, where it's like really obvious that it's loop. It sounds more glitched, like it's not supposed to be happening. Whereas if I enable snap, I'm going to enable glide also, turn on the spread a little bit. Now I can select any point, and it will automatically snap to the point where both the left and the right speakers are not going out or in to produce vibration, so that both the end and beginning loop points are always going to be at 0. And that way, I can get really clean loops. You can also play it backwards. That starts its way over here. I don't like doing it backwards, but you can. Yay! I'm gonna find a point that sounds pretty good. Cool. I generally like my basses to be pretty percussive, so I use this pitch envelope in the pitch and oscillator window to give it a little bit of a transient at the beginning, like that. You'll notice that in a lot of my songs, they're very sort of percussive and not sharp, but like they hit sort of harder that way, in my opinion. What's another thing that's cool about Sampler is that it has this FM option where you can apply FM in a very similar way to you could in FM8 or in Operator or in any other FM synth, but you get to apply it to the sample itself. And as long as this is tuned, then the FM is going to be the same pitch, which is the main reason it's important to tune this. So I'm adjusting the maximum volume here and the attack, decay, sustain, release envelope of the FM itself. And you can hear you get some cool texture straight out of the box with that. I like that. So we'll go over here. We'll just lay out a basic note. I have my drums set up so that the kick and snare group is right here at the bottom, so that when I'm sequencing my basses, I can be really sort of conscious of where these kicks and snares are falling and sequence accordingly. I like to sort of layer my basses with my kicks and snares to give the whole thing a more cohesive rhythm. So I'll show you the drum loop just so we can get a feel for the rhythm of that. I actually like this better over here. Cool. So now we're gonna start layering in the basses to add the sort of design into the rhythm. And now I can hear that modulation is sort of off. I'm gonna And this is why it's important to get a lot of movement even in that one tone. Cool, there we go. That sounds good to me. Let's see where it's at in the stand. Looking good, probably just not loud enough. Kick and snare hitting at -5, bass is hitting at -5. It should be loud enough. I think it's just not a good selection. So now I have this first that I like, and I want to add variation. So now what I can do, since I have the mix down right, and I know that's not going to change because I flattened out the sample beforehand, I can just duplicate, set out the next one, and do a different variation in sampler. Like, this is just a sign shaping or, soft clipping distortion. There we go. It's cool to play with octaves on different variation. I don't know about this one. So I like that rhythm, and rather than matching the basses to the kicks, I'm going to do the opposite. So that's two variations that are kind of holding down the basic. Rhythm of the track. And that's usually where I like to start, and then you can just keep duplicating and adding variations in the spaces. And just, using this one sample, you can make sort of varied sections. And oftentimes you'll start hearing, like, I want something really percussive on that last beat, so I'm going to make something really percussive for that last beat. There it is. And then you just start layering samples in there to fill those cool spaces, like hip hop strings. I think this is what I used before. And sampling. I like sampling because it gives you an opportunity to use stuff that you wouldn't think of initially. Fades are an awesome tool if you haven't experienced them yet. Their volume modulations are the most important. And what's cool about this sort of stuff is that if you consolidate it, it gets saved into the sample. So you can like do some sort of crazy, something like that. And if I consolidate it, it adds in the beeps. So this one hasn't been probably as organized as the last tutorial, but hopefully you learned a lot. The main thing, I guess, is to stay focused, to sort of, group tracks as you go, something I forgot to mention. Compress the groups together. Glue compressor on a parallel compression setting is great for that. Helps you sort of keep your eye on the ball in terms of like, what does my drum track sound like? What does my bass track sound like? What do my samples sound like? And you can sort of identify problems within each group, stay organized as you go. Sampler is great, in my opinion. MIDI is great for sequencing because I can keep it in my head like, this is my first bass, this is my second bass, this is my third bass, this is my fourth, and I can really be sure of what's playing where. And if I want to move this modulation over here, it's very simple. If I want to switch it up, I just move it down. I don't have to go, scouring the world for different modulations. Like if I don't like that. And that way you can keep it in your mind that you're placing notes in specific sections, doing specific things. So hopefully this was helpful for everybody. Hopefully the audio recorded this time. If so, you can expect I guess. Yep. Great. Super great times. Bye.